Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. Before we get into our second one of the day, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link GSMCpodcast.net, but also through the Super Chat, Super Thanks, or Super Stickers features here on YouTube as well. They're a great way to contribute and interact with the show. They're greatly appreciated by me and my fellow podcasters. It's a significant way to help the show be even better than it already is. Without further ado, let's jump right into our next segment of the day. And we're transitioning very briefly from the NFL to college football. Not many interesting games here in Week 6, but a lot with semi-intriguing fantasy matchups, as there are a lot of interesting conference games happening now that, while they seem like mismatches, definitely could project to be better from a fantasy perspective than, say, in real life. Because I have some top 25 games on my list, but at the end of the day, I still have some that are under the radar as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into this segment. Starting off with a top 25 game, Missouri, Texas A&M. This game, for many different reasons, can project to be one that is highly competitive. And these are two teams in the SEC who can either make the playoff with a late run or ultimately end up losing 3 games and be left out of the conversation. But at the end of the day, what this game is going to come down to is which offense shows up. And I think that in this game, I feel like, Missouri and Texas A&M are two teams that I feel like their offenses have been underperforming this season, at least to a certain extent. And while Missouri's offense certainly isn't one that really should have problems, because of the fact that a lot of people like Brady Cook, like Luther Burden, I feel like right now it's coming down to, okay, how can they do this consistently in the SEC? On the Texas A&M side, a little bit of a quarterback change from Connor Wegman to, Marcel Reed, who's really been impressive as a true freshman. And I think at the end of the day, both of these guys, Brady Cook and Marcel Reed, are two of the quarterbacks in the SEC who kind of fly under the radar, but not necessarily deservedly so, but in a way that doesn't make them stand out as guys who would want competitively down the stretch in bigger games. And so, looking at it from that angle, I kind of feel like it's going to be a tactical battle where either of these offenses could shine, right? Brady Cook could have a big game, Luther Burden could have another big game this year, and Missouri can win this easily. We haven't seen that just yet from Missouri. On the Texas A&M side of things, they really haven't had any standout play. When your lead receiver is Cyrus Allen, as much as he's an exciting player as a transfer, he only has about 200 yards in the season. You got to get your wide receivers going if you're Texas A&M in this game. At the end of the day, not the best top 25 matchup, but you certainly can't get, worse. You know what I mean? Because this still is going to be an entertaining, perhaps meaningful SEC game for both these teams, so they try to keep pace in the CFP conversation. But we're going to have to see on the field which offense truly shines, because both of these defenses, I would favor Texas A&M, but both of these defenses have had their problems. Texas A&M with a big play, Missouri just in general, or slowing down inferior teams as well. So it's going to be interesting to see who comes out victorious in College Station. The next game that I have is Baylor, Iowa State. This game could come back to bite me from a fantasy perspective because it doesn't necessarily project to have as many offensive fireworks as some other games that I'm going to mention. But not for nothing, I feel like both of these offenses can make big plays down the stretch. And I feel as if, talking about all of these players from this perspective. When I look at Baylor, they have a lot of talent on their offense, but they haven't really been gelling. And the things that should be working for them haven't been working. Look at Iowa State. It's just timely. It's not necessarily anything special, but Rocco Becht is one of the better mistake-free QBs in the Big 12 and perhaps in the entire country. So this game is going to be all about protecting the football if you're either of these teams. I trust Iowa State a little bit more in that regard because looking at it from Iowa State perspective, you're one of only 2 undefeated teams in the Big 12, and you're doing it in a way that's highly indicative of what the Big 12 could look like in the future. Iowa State is a timely team on offense and an aggressive team defensively. They have a lot of different guys on the defensive end who are fearsome players who know the grittiness of the Big 12 and just want to compete at a high level on the back end. If you're Baylor, you have to find a way. Your offense get clicking immediately, perhaps in the run game, but right now their leading rusher is their quarterback, Sawyer Robinson, so make of that what you will. But I'm more intrigued to see which offense, if anything, can erupt for one or more explosive plays, because there are not going to be many in this game. It's going to be all about which quarterback, A, has that explosive play in his pocket, and B, protects the football better. And I think it's going to be Rocco Becht, but it is what it is, and this game could definitely be one to monitor as in a fantasy perspective, but in a weird way because we don't know what to expect from both of these offenses. In Syracuse, UNLV is one of those weird games where I feel like the offenses are going to shine, but at the end of the day, UNLV is in a weird place. In Syracuse, yes, I believe they're 4-1. McCord transferring in from Ohio State to Syracuse and leading this offense has looked pretty good. I feel like neither of these teams really are convinced that they can sustain this level of offense, if you catch my drift. Because Syracuse, as much as I love McCord and love what he's doing with his team, they're one of those squads where I look at them and go, well, you look good, but you're not necessarily a team that I feel can compete with weirder schools in your schedule like at UNLV. You know what I'm saying? Whereas on the UNLV side of things, I don't know what to make of the whole NIL drama and how it's going to affect them going forward. But you had that one sample game where they beat up in a very important game Fresno State for a big Group of 5 win for them. So this game was one of those games where you kind of want to see both of these offenses continue to look good, but it's also one of those games where it's a weird non-conference matchup, a weird kind of Power 4 Group of 5 matchup as well, where anything goes. And for both of these teams, I'm looking to see some consistency in this game, some continued consistency in whatever plan they feel works for them. And the last game I want to talk about, very surprising game to see on this list in terms of, competitiveness, because I kind of feel like this could be a blowout, but nothing against Vanderbilt. They are a very interesting team. But the reason why I like it as a fantasy kind of game is because of the dual threat quarterbacks. Both Milroe and Pavio might just be 2 of the better dual threat QBs in the country. And if Vanderbilt is all about possessing the football in this game. If Diego Pavio is timely. He's not necessarily the best thrower in the world, but he can make big plays on the field with his legs. If he can get a couple of big plays, control the football most importantly, protect the football most importantly, against an Alabama defense that kind of looked sketchy down the stretch against Georgia, I feel like this game could be one of those games where it's not going to be close at the end, but the catch-up football that Vanderbilt could play would be beautiful. It's not going to be, a situation where they're going to make this a close game by any means, because I think this is going to be a blowout. But it's going to be down the stretch interesting to see if, Alabama relaxes some of its players, take their foot off the gas, if, Vanderbilt can look pretty good down the stretch in terms of catch-up football. But at the end of the day, I think that this game, from a kind of fan perspective, is kind of bad. Because Vanderbilt, as much as I want to love them, they don't really feel like a team that's ready to compete just yet in the SEC. They could be competitive in the next 2 or 3 years, but not just yet. But I love what they've been doing. I love what they've been doing, Vanderbilt, and I wish them the best of luck this season. Let me know what you think in the comments about these games, because all of them are really, really in-depth games, right? When you look at the QB matchups in all of them, you kind of expect to see fireworks. But all of them, in some ways, have issues. When we look at the Missouri-Texas A&M game, I love Brady Cook. I love Marcel Reed. But the question about Marcel Reed is, can he continue with his success in this offense? And the question with Brady Cook is, he hasn't really looked good. Can he string together a couple of games to keep Missouri in the CFP picture? And then the Baylor-Iowa State kind of thing. They're not the sexiest quarterbacks in the country, I know, in terms of, explosive plays. But if one of them has that in their bag, that could be a difference maker in this game. Because you saw that Baylor can keep up with anybody in the Big 12. And Iowa State is one of those teams who's going to try to limit the explosive play by hook or by crook. And so I kind of feel like either of these quarterbacks can have a terrible game, or one of them has a nice play to kind of make this a fun game to perhaps tune into later in the contest. And then Syracuse UNLV, interesting QB tale. Hodge Malik Williams, I wish him the best of luck, but we're going to have to see how he's tested down the stretch in some very important Group of 5 games in this big non-conference game. On Kyle McCord, he looked pretty good thus far to start off his Syracuse career, but I have my concerns about what Syracuse can look like in these non-conference games, and last but not least, Alabama Vanderbilt, just because of the fun that could happen with Milroe and Pavia. Let me know what you think in the comments, because all of these games are interesting. But when we come back on the other side of things, I do want to jump into some high-risk, high-reward players for Week 5 of the fantasy football season. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about it.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports